I want to begin with a very heartfelt statement about why we are here. And we are here to hear from teachers who teach every day, classrooms full of kids, classrooms full of people who are eager to learn and sometimes not so eager to learn. But people who, both of these panelists tonight, have spent more than 20 years in education. They've studied for teaching children and youth. They have had training in teaching children and youth. And in all of the confusions over the news and in the newspapers about angry school boards and angry parents, I never once heard in all of those newscasts or recordings any of the board members or parents asked to talk to teachers, to hear from the teachers themselves. How do they teach our children? And what do they teach our children? And that's what we're here tonight to hear. So I hope hope that's why you're here, because that's what's going to happen. So in this house tonight, I want to just mention a few people that are important. I do this at every session. So some of you have been with us for every session, so you go, oh yeah, I know all those people, but some of you haven't. And so I want to introduce folks to you. We have a team. Everything that has been put together for Shifting Landscapes has happened through the 6-person team, with some members having other parts of their lives and having to move in and out, but it has been this team. Kathy Organ is over here, member of the team. Thomas Trahey, who is back with doing all the electronics every week, is a member of the team. Kathy Calabretta is on Zoom right now, listening out in Hamlin Lake, snowbound as the day is long. He is a member of the team. The other people who are members of the team, in addition to me, of course, is Matt Sanderson from West Shore Community College, and Mike McKinney, who started out still as a member of West Shore Community College's faculty and now retired from there. And so that's the group that put it together. We were working, probably planning it for over a year, and still, have to go back to planning stages at different points. Also is Eric Smith, who is the director of the Mason County District Library. Sue Carlson, who's here in tonight's audience, does all of our press releases. She's very valuable and has always been here, stalwart member. Nathan is in the back. He is a student staff person at the library. Also together with me, shoveled outside tonight. A little bit of our somewhat delay is because we pulled up and oops, forgot that LACA is closed on Mondays, and the snow wasn't shoveled yet. So we put our elbows to the task. So thank you, Nathan. So housekeeping. Still, there's decaf coffee in the back and sweets and books. So they're all together. Food for the brain, food for the body. And so we do hope that you look at some of those items. If there's a book that you would like, the library will take down your name and then make sure that they order a book like that for you, if it's usually through Mel, the library system, and then you can pick it up at the library. It's a wonderful system if you haven't used mel.org yet. And then finally in your hands is a resource material, so that most of those items came from the 2 panelists we have tonight, of additional things that you could read. And then a survey. If you would fill out the survey before you leave, that really helps us. I just get so pleased when I see lots and lots of surveys filled out at the end of the night. So the setting for this evening is to untangle some of the things you may have heard and hear for yourselves from the teachers. This is part of the education series, and it's been a wide range, wide interpretation of education. It doesn't deal, this is the only night that deals with K-12. The very first night dealt with the 1619 project, which is Blacks now looking at their own history and then developing their own history. So just as maybe about 20 years ago, maybe a little bit more than that, because I don't like to reveal my age. But anyway, women started developing our own history. And it really wasn't until the people being talked about took charge that the history revealed new things. So did 1619 project. Some of the facts remain the same, but the interpretation of them changes. And so if you haven't listened to it, you might listen to that recording. All of these sessions are caught on Zoom. And so please listen to it. Also, that particular lecture is also available just simply in a document. The next one was in this series is CRT, which is critical race theory. And last week we had a lawyer from Wayne Law School, Wayne State University, speak to us about that. We are trying to have people who do the work talk to you about it. So that's the grounding that we start from. So also we have 2 local teachers for a precise reason. Education is local. All the decisions are local for K-12. So it behooves us to talk to local people if we're wondering and curious. I also have another person to thank in this audience, and that is Mike Nagel. And he's over there. He is both. He is first. Let's say tonight, he's a board member, a school board member. But Mike and I go back quite a bit. Mike has been at West Shore for over 20 years. And I came about 2013, and I was Dean of Arts and Sciences for that period of time when I was there. And Mike was, I could say I was your boss, but the hierarchy of higher education. Mike, I just deeply respected Mike. We sometimes didn't see eye to eye, and that's a good thing. And sometimes we did. And the first person I thought of to call when we were looking for teachers was Mike Nagel, because I knew he'd tell me who were going to be some good people to have present tonight to us, to have us learn about what is happening at particularly the Ludington area schools. So thanks, Mike. I want to give you a little bit of background before I turn this over. The mic's over to Todd Skipper and Amber Nasson. Amber's background is, both of them actually grew up in Michigan. Amber grew up in Manistee. She graduated from Alma College. She taught her first six years at the Calaveras Norman School District, and then since 2008 has been at Ludington area schools. She has received in 2015 the American Legion Teacher of the Year in Michigan Award, and in 2017 Applebee's Teacher of the Year Award. Beyond teaching, her favorite activities are coaching, the varsity quiz bowl, hiking in the woods, reading a good book, and hanging out with family and friends. Todd Skipper, he graduated from Granville High School in Grand Rapids. He has associate degree, for community colleges at Grand Rapids Community College. He has a BA from the University of Michigan in History and Social Science, and he has an MA from Walden University in Curriculum Instruction and Assessment. He started teaching in 1997, over 25 years ago. He has been with Ludington area schools since 1998, so that's just the second year he entered teaching, for those keeping scores and numbers. He has first 21 years at Ludington, he taught high school. And he was also a co-coach with the Quiz Bowl. So we have teachers who work overtime with our students happily. And in 2019, to stay active, he wasn't ready for retirement, but needed a refresh, he went to middle school. So, and he's been teaching there since for the last 5 years. So what what Amber and Todd will do tonight is they have 4 questions that they have posed to themselves, thinking that these were questions that you would have of them. And they will both share what are some of the differences and some of the commonalities when they teach children. I mean, for me, the question was, what's age appropriate, and how do you change things to show that some children are, I mean, older children might be more developed than younger children, and how do you do that with children? And then they'll also talk about just what they do themselves as individual teachers that won't be, in a way, back and forth. So we will have questions afterwards. Make notes on any kind of sheets of paper that you like. If you'd like to ask some questions. For those on Zoom, we will be keeping record of the chat log, and we'll be turning to your questions as well. So please pose those as you go along, and then we'll come back to them. And if we don't, pipe up again and say, I still have my question out there and it's not answered. So without further ado, I am going to now turn the mics over to Todd Skipper and Amber Nasson. Please help me welcome them.
Hi, can everyone hear me okay? So I'm Amber Nasson. So this is the first time that we've done anything like this before, and our hope for tonight is to create transparency about what we do in our schools here in Ludington, so that the community and so that parents are aware of what is taught to our students. I think it's really important because Brooke did mention that previous sessions in this series addressed critical race theory and the 1619 project, that those are not things that we teach at Ludington area schools. That's not something that comes up in my classroom or in Todd's classroom. They're just not a part of our curriculum. I do think that transparency of the curriculum is important. And so our first question that we posed is about how people are concerned about what is taught in schools today to our children. And so how do we make parents aware of what we teach in our classes to their children? And we think that transparency is really important. We want parents to be involved in their child's education, and we hope that they'll be curious about what their children are learning. Education should be a partnership between teachers and parents, and it is a community effort. So one of the ways that we make curriculum transparent to our students' parents is through something called Canvas. Canvas is our online learning management system. So it's a website that students can log into to access their lessons and materials. Parents can create a parent account, and the instructions for doing so are published on the LASD website under the technology page. When parents create a Canvas account, they can then link it to their student's account, and they shadow them wherever their student goes. In Canvas, they can follow. So when their child is enrolled in a class, say with me or with Todd, they follow and they can observe everything that Todd and I do. So we create transparency in that way. And so what can a parent see on Canvas? So one of the things they can see is the assignments that their child is asked to complete. They can see their child's submission. They can view their child's grade and any comments that the teacher has left their student. Another thing is they can see on a daily basis what the teacher is presenting to their child. What kind of lessons are they being offered? So every teacher can organize their instructions slightly differently, but we all use modules in some way. And a module is just a unit or a chunk with a label, and then the child can go into the module and open or close it. When they open it, they can see a bunch of resources. And so in the way I organize modules is there's a module for each day of the week, and it'll be labeled with the date. When they open a module, they'll see at the top instructions, then they'll see a list of resources, and at the bottom, they'll see their assignment. When they open the instructions, the parent can view the learning target, what is the standard or objective for the day, and then a series of instructions in case the child isn't in school due to illness or for whatever reason, so that they can be caught up. And so the parents have access to all of those materials, any video, any readings the parents can see. And then they can know what their child was being asked to perform, what skills they're being asked to demonstrate. I'm a parent also, and I really like that ability to see in the middle school what's being taught. And then when at dinner, I can have that conversation and say, what are you learning? And if she says, well, I don't know, nothing, I can say, well, I know differently. And so then I can kind of ask some questions to get her to be more specific. So Todd, if you want to.
All right, so my name is Todd Skipper, and I am going to throw out a warning ahead of time. I'm a history teacher by trade, which means I'm going to tell a lot of stories throughout this. Even recently, it's kind of ironic sitting in front of a microphone, but I've become obsessed with the show Ted Lasso. And so as a result of it, there's always these moments where he's telling stories, and that's how he gets to his point. So bear with me. That'll happen quite a bit. And to piggyback off of what Amber said earlier, parents can follow what we do. I mean, I've taught a lot of students over the years, but I want you guys to imagine this, since you'll understand where I'm going this in a second, that I once had to teach the kids of the social studies professor at West Shore Community College, AP US history. And so now that was a lot of pressure, you know, and so I'm only joking because Mike Nagle is here today, and he is obviously the professor out at West Shore, author, school board member, and he recommended that both of us be here today. And so we appreciate that. We were honored to be here, and he's going to be doing one of these presentations in a couple of weeks as well. So thank you, Mike. And then before also, I need to thank Amber Nason, my colleague up here, because without her, I wouldn't be able to tie a bow tie that my mom got me for Christmas. And if you guys are unaware, if you drive by the hospital right now, there is a green sign that says the 2019 state champion Quiz Bowl team. And that is a direct result of her right there, along with all these other successes. So Amber mentioned earlier that we do not use the 1619 project or CRT or any of that stuff. But I do want everyone to kind of understand is like, when we look at sort of curriculums and stuff like that, we do, however, teach about the year 1619 and 1620. And I want to point this out is, so the House of Burgesses is formed in 1619. All right, that's an important, obviously, year. And so this is the beginning of representative government in the new colonies, republicanism. 1620 is the Mayflower Compact, which established the beginnings of self-government, democracy. And so when we look at things, the USA is a democratic republic. The seeds were formed during this time period. So, you know, some of you have said that the American Revolution kind of starts with those two moments. Those are seedlings right there. They're planted in those 2 years, and then they kind of form. In fact, some would argue that the beginnings of the colonists deciding they wanted to be ruled by themselves happened right then and there. And that plays out throughout a lot of things in history. And so Amber mentions that we are transparent about what we are teaching. Our job is to present curriculum that allows students to kind of form ideas and be able to defend their thoughts with evidence. And so, you know, like one of our curriculum statements is, you know, describe the role of state authority, military power, taxation systems, institutions of coerced labor, including slavery, in building and maintaining empires. And examples might be Egypt, Rome, Aztec, Mayas, Incas. And so what I want to kind of point out to everybody is that if you ask any student how the pyramids were built, and no, it wasn't aliens, all right, they will tell you that it was slaves. You know, almost immediately they'll say it. And so if you look at social pyramids in the Aztecs, Incas, Egypts, every single time, so I brought in a couple examples of kids' work that they had done, and every single time at the bottom, you're going to see the same thing in each one, that slaves are going to end up at the bottom. And so if you look at a social pyramid, something like this right here, all right, you're going to see that society shapes our world. And I'm about to make a really bad dad joke. Shapes our world. The triangle, that idea right there is that it shapes our world. So, you know, pardon the pun, it's bad, I know that, but I'm a dad after all, so I got thousands of them. So, but I wanted you to kind of understand that we want everybody to understand. We want them to be able to look at it. You know, they want to be able to see what we're doing, and we do that. You know, anybody can kind of see what we're doing on a daily basis, and that helps parents, it helps us. We can kind of organize. Like I use a calendar and it kind of showcases where everything's are going. So if you have, a snow day or you have something that comes up, you can put things in that calendar and the kids can kind of see what they're going to be doing and when they're going to be doing it. So I think it's really helpful to have this and parents can follow right along with us.
So our next question that we wanted to address is around the title of this presentation today. And the title of the presentation is Teaching Difficult Truths or Uncomfortable Truths to Children and Youth. And how do we approach this? And we would like to provide some examples of how we approach this. There is a level of discomfort or difficulty that is appropriate for the classroom. And then there's a level that's inappropriate. So it's really on a spectrum. On one end of the spectrum, if it's not difficult or uncomfortable enough, then it's boring. And that's not engaging and you've lost your students. But on the other end of the spectrum, if it's too difficult and too uncomfortable, then the student will shut down. And then again, you've lost your students. So how do you find that balance of just enough discomfort, just enough difficulty where it's engaging and relevant without having the classroom just shut down and not engage in the learning? And where this level of difficulty is going to differ from grade level to grade level. It's going to differ from student to student or classroom to classroom. So you have, over the years, you get really good at gauging your room and knowing what this group might be comfortable with and what this group might be comfortable with. And it's always shifting. So Todd and I can't teach the same topics because he teaches 6th, 7th, and 8th, and I teach 9 through 12. So we have to think about it very differently. So before I decide if I'm going to teach a difficult topic, I always ask myself 2 questions. The first question I have to ask myself before I teach anything is, does it help me teach a state content standard? And one of the resources that I asked Brooke to put in the handout was a link to the state content standards for social studies. If I'm going to spend valuable classroom time teaching something, I have to make sure that it covers a standard. And if you're not aware, the state standards are things that our legislature votes on and approves, and then those are published for everyone to read, and then we have to make sure every lesson connects to at least one or more of those standards. And the second question I have to ask myself is, does this topic help my students make sense of the world around them? Does this help them explain what's going on? Can they make connections? Is it relevant to them personally? If they can't see the relevance, it's really hard for them to engage or to care. If the answer to both of those questions, it covers a standard and it's relevant. If the answer to those questions is yes, then I evaluate how much of the topic would be appropriate for my grade level and for my group of students. Again, I want it to be difficult enough to be interesting, but not so difficult they shut down. So I'd like to give you some examples of difficult subjects that we talk about. And Todd also taught civics when he was in the high school, and we worked on this curriculum together. And so we do quite a large section on the First Amendment, freedom of speech. And we ground our discussion about how the First Amendment's purpose is to protect intellectual freedom, the freedom to think, and how that's really important in protecting a democracy from tyranny, from people who would try to indoctrinate us and try to tell us what we think. And that in order to protect intellectual freedom, the First Amendment creates something that is coined the marketplace of ideas. And you can view the marketplace of ideas as like going to a shopping mall, and there's all these different stores, but instead of selling products, they're selling ideas. And you can walk around and go shopping for ideas, and you have the right, because of the First Amendment, you have the right to hear a variety of ideas and to judge them for yourselves and to accept or reject. You also have the right to offer ideas into the marketplace of ideas. And so the First Amendment's job is to protect us from tyranny by protecting that marketplace and keeping it vibrant. And so in order to teach this, we talk about how the First Amendment is a relative right. we talk about how the right to swing your fist ends where the other man's nose begins. And how the First Amendment, and that comes actually from a Supreme Court case called Schenck versus US 1919. And how what that means is you have freedom, you have personal freedom, you have freedom of speech, but your freedom never gives you the right to harm another person. So nothing would protect your right from Schenck versus US, nothing would protect your right to shout fire in a crowded theater and cause a panic. That's not speech that the court has ever said is protected. So we do give the students some different examples of speech where the courts have said, that's not okay, that harms other people. So for example, perjury, you're not allowed to lie under oath, that harms other people. Slander, you're not allowed to lie on purpose about someone in order to harm their reputation. One of the big limitations on speech we discuss is from the court case Brandenburg versus Ohio, 1969, in which the Supreme Court said, if your speech incites imminent lawless action, it is not protected. So in other words, if your speech, if they can prove that your speech incited or caused someone to immediately go out and commit an illegal act and that you were the reason they did it, that's not protected speech. So what we talk about is that we protect freedom of speech very highly, but there's a line, and sometimes it can be crossed. And when it is crossed and it harms other people, then that speech has not been protected by our court system. But that line is really difficult to define. And it's a really tricky job for our court. And this is where we can introduce those difficult topics. So the activity I like to start with is I'll give the students a list of different real cases that our court has discussed. And I have the students get together in small groups, and their task is to discuss the issue. And if they think that speech should be protected, do they think the court should protect that speech? So for example, some cases that I asked them to discuss are Skokie versus Illinois. And this is an uncomfortable case in which in the village of Skokie, Illinois, there was a Nazi party in the state of Illinois that wanted to hold a rally. What was interesting about the village of Skokie is that it had a very large Jewish population, and many of those residents had survived the Holocaust. So the case of Skokie versus Illinois went through the court system. Is the Nazi party allowed to hold this rally in Skokie? And students discuss if they think they should be or they shouldn't. Another case that we discuss is Texas versus Johnson. In that case, a man was holding a protest about something he was upset about with the government, and in his protest, he burned an American flag. And so students are posed with the question, do they think that type of speech should be protected? Another case is Snyder versus Phelps, which is a much more recent case. And in that case, a group was standing outside of a church in which a funeral was being held for a soldier who had died in the line of duty. And the group that was protesting held up signs that said, "Thank God for dead soldiers." And that one is so uncomfortable. And students are like, why would someone do that? But then we ask them to discuss, do you think that that should be freedom? Or does that cross the line to harming other people and it shouldn't be protected? After the students meet in small groups and they discuss what they think, and the focus is to really develop their reasoning. Why do they think what they think? Then they bring it back to the whole class and they present their reasoning and they listen to each other and they hear all of that different reasoning. And then we read, here's what the Supreme Court or the lesser appeals court would have decided, or what they decided. And then do you agree with their reasoning? And so we really focus on the skill set of breaking down reasoning. So it is they're uncomfortable topics, but they're just uncomfortable enough to be engaging without shutting down the classroom environment. Another example of a difficult topic that we use in the classroom, again in civics, we do a mock Supreme Court trial where students take on the role of a Supreme Court justice or a lawyer or a friend of the court. And they read about a case called Rice versus Paladin Press. In this case, there was a publishing company, Paladin Press, that published a book called Hitman, the Technical Manual for the Independent Contractor. And this is a real book that you can purchase, and it teaches the reader how to be a professional hitman and to get away with it. and avoid law enforcement. And someone actually bought the book and used it and committed 3 murders. The families of the victims sued the book publisher. The book publisher claimed First Amendment protection, that it's freedom of speech. So what we do is we have the students read the Supreme Court background. We have them read the facts of the case. We have them read the First Amendment. We have them read other precedent-setting Supreme Court cases, so historical cases that might give them some reasoning to use, and they have to develop an argument in which they choose what do they think about the book? Do they think the First Amendment protects it or doesn't it? And then they go through the mock trial. The nice thing about the mock trial is it gives them a structure for civil debate, so it's polite instead of being just an argument where they're shouting back and forth. And that structure is really helpful, and they take it seriously. They really like it. And we have some old choir robes that we use now, and the kids put their choir robes on, and we have a gavel, and the kids are like, I want to be the Chief Justice. I want the gavel. Mm-hmm. And the justices take their role very seriously. They understand that they need to be neutral at first and listen to both sides and grill the lawyers equally. And then they conference and they make their decision, and then we discuss the reasoning that was used. Whenever teaching difficult issues, I think it's really important for the teacher to never tell the students what to think. If I do that, then I'm removing the students' opportunity to think for themselves and to learn how to reason for themselves. And I'm telling them that there's a right answer, and that right answer is an easy one to find. And that's not really fun for high school students. So I view my role as giving them opportunities to read the Constitution for themselves, to read the reasoning of our courts, and then providing them safe and structured opportunities to discuss issues and demonstrate their learning. And all of the issues that I bring in, those are real events that have happened in our history and that the courts have weighed in on. And so this gives students the opportunity to reflect on what the Constitution means to them.
I want to kind of continue on with what Amber mentioned, that phrase, marketplace of ideas. All right. And it is important that I kind of mention this because recently I was just talking about George Washington's presidency, and HBO Max had this small little 12-minute video on George Washington. So I clicked on it, not wondering what they were talking about. What I found was really fascinating was so they imagine what would it be like if George Washington lived today in a modern social media world. And why this is so fascinating is archivists have gone back and looked at the countless letters that Washington wrote. And when I mean countless, he was averaging anywhere from 5 to 20 letters a day. All right, this is a fantastic resource. But they decided that they were going to kind of almost create their own Facebook page. These archivists were going back through there and they were looking at what dates was going on in his communications. And so he's got communications with Alexander Hamilton. All right, he's got communications with Thomas Jefferson. But the eye-opening part of this video to me was his conversations with Lafayette. So the Marquis de Lafayette is the French hero during the American Revolution. And what was mind-boggling is how Lafayette convinced Washington on the issue of slavery. So Washington inherited slaves at age like 11 or 12. All right, that is his world. That's all he's ever known. He's just in Virginia. That's it. That's his small world at that time. Yet through his own sort of marketplace of ideas, Washington starts to grow as a person, then as a leader, as a general, and then ultimately president. And he's the only one of the 9 presidents that owned slaves to actually free his slaves. Now, how did he get to that decision? The marketplace of ideas. Others convinced him that he should change. And that's, I think that's a really unique and a really eye-opening sort of idea of, letting people kind of go, oh, wow, I didn't think of it from that perspective. And that kind of hits on the current reality of education right now. And I'm going to be as blunt as possible. You cannot make everyone happy. It's just never going to happen. All right. When you talk about like government, it is literally impossible to make everybody happy. All right. Government is kind of divided into these 2 categories. There's the idea that government's supposed to help the common good or sort of moral good, or personal freedoms and individual rights. And so when I do this, it's kind of like that scales of justice. All right, you have this idea. And so when we look at things and issues nowadays, and I'll just throw out a couple of them. When people think about masks in public places now, is it common good or is it individual rights? Smoking in public places used to be around all over the place. Now is it a common good to ban it, or is it still individual rights? Should you be allowed to do that? And then you have other issues from gun control to abortion. You have to do this sort of scale. And it's amazing how people can be on one thing and very passionate about that one thing on one side, and then immediately go to the other side on another issue. And it's kind of like that scales. And that's kind of what we see sometimes in education. It's sometimes very hard, but we're trying to get these information out there and let the students kind of decide. And I'm going to kind of bounce back and forth here between high school time and middle school time. So when I was in the high school, the most difficult decision a president's ever had to make was Harry Truman's decision to drop the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki to end World War II. Truman's got to make this decision. This is not going to be easy. All right. And as you kind of look at this, I kind of looked at it as, all right, I don't want to do this necessarily in the public light. Students sometimes have to have the opportunity to kind of write in private, pick. They don't want everyone to look at themselves. So sometimes, I would ask them, questions and imagine you're President Truman and you have to make this decision that is going to kill a lot of people, yet at the time, possibly save 1 million lives. And it's an impossible sort of choice. Truman's got to make that. All right. Asking students, they don't always want to raise their hand. They don't want to do it, but sometimes they'll kind of think about it. And you ask them to explain their position and they will explain it. They will back it up. They will look at the facts. They will kind of look at the readings and they'll kind of decide, what direction they are. And as Amber said, I'm not going to tell them what I feel. I'm going to let them make that decision on their own. Now, that one's a tough one. That's more of a high school level one. Right now, I'm in the middle school. And so part of the reason I'm here is I'm kind of in both worlds. And so when I'm there, I have a book, I put this out there. It's called Times of Crisis. It's about a case study of presidential decisions. And almost every president has to make a tough choice at some point. It's what way they're going to decide. And so I mentioned Washington earlier. One of the first things he has to do as president is the whiskey tax, whiskey rebellion. All of a sudden, he's got to deal with this situation, and he knows that he could repeal the tax. I mean, after all, we just fought a war mostly about taxes, and the first thing we do is put a tax on whiskey. All right, people are not happy. All right, next, he either has to defend the Constitution, or he knows right then and there, every single time somebody puts a new tax out there, there's going to be a rebellion. So Washington has to make this decision, and he just basically says, I have to defend the new Constitution. All right, he puts down the rebellion and kind of ends that as an option from that point on. And so that kind of goes on there. He knew what he had to do, but it's not an easy choice. And then you have one like John Adams, the next president rolls in there. He's got one called the Alien Sedition Act. Now, you got to bear in mind with this one, he either has to go against his wife, Abigail Adams, and his party, or he has to go against his own individual principles on individual rights. Now, if I pose that question to kids, they all go to individual rights, almost every one of them. And I'm like thinking, they're not married. Sorry, honey, I'm about to, like this one, how many have ever heard the expression happy wife, happy life? I'm really terrible at this, so I'm sorry, honey. They don't understand that going against Abigail Adams is not going to be the easiest thing on the planet for John Adams. And so here's this man with this dilemma, like, does he go along with his party and his wife, or does he go against his principles? And that's a really tough thing for people to kind of realize, is he's basically caught in that proverbial rock in a hard place. And then you get others, Andrew Jackson, Indian Affairs, and Abraham Lincoln, Fort Sumter. These are interesting choices, and they all kind of pose that idea of, what is the president going to do? And so what we've created is this idea of CER. All right. CER stands for claims, evidence, and reasoning. All right. They have to pick something. They have to pick a claim, and then they have to back it up with evidence. And it's the idea, I don't care what direction they go in. All right. Most of the kids want individual rights. Absolutely. He should do this. But they may not always understand where we're going with it. And so I think that's part of it is that giving them options, letting them see these things and then letting them pick and decide to back it up with that claim, evidence, and reasoning. And that's become a really important thing. You know, for a while there, Amber and I were really working hard on this because the SAT required a writing portion. And so we were trying to get them to understand. So like we have probably read the Declaration of Independence more times than you can, you know, imagine. All right, because we used it to try to get kids to understand what was going on and the importance of that document. So that's part of what we're trying to do nowadays.
So our third question that we posed is, how do we handle discussing current controversial topics in our classroom and provide an example of how we might do this or when we might avoid the topic? I am a firm believer in the teachable moment. So if there's something that's happening right now that students really want to know about, that we should try to take advantage of it. But I'll be honest, in the last few years, a lot of current topics have become too difficult for the classroom. There's too much controversy. And so I mentioned earlier that spectrum, and there are so many current topics today that trigger the fight or flight response in our students. And by that, I mean fight. They want to fight about it. And instead of having a debate where they listen and make reasoned arguments, they're just shouting at one another and they're ready to fight. They're never listening at that point, and so they're not learning at that point. Or you'll have the students flight. They are done. They don't want to have anything to do with this topic. They're going to put their head down. They're going to leave the room. And so when you have a topic like that, you don't want to bring that into the classroom because really no learning is taking place. And unfortunately, with just how society has just become so much more divisive right now, it's best with some of those topics to not discuss them. So what I do to bring in current topics into the classroom and to do it in a way that creates safety for students is I have an assignment I call my AHA statements. So I divide my curriculum up into units, and at the end of each unit, there's a test. And then the day after the test, they have this opportunity to do this AHA statement assignment. So I'll curate a list of articles, just a ton of articles from all these different publications. And then I give these to students and I tell them you're welcome to go elsewhere and find different articles, but you need to pick 3 articles to read of your choice. And sometimes it'll be about one of those topics that's really tough. And sometimes it's an article about the latest flavor of Oreo cookie. So I give them choices. How much uncomfortableness are you willing to take on today? You pick, you read. The assignment, they're given about a half an hour to read. And then they write what I call an AHA statement. And in an AHA statement, they write about a paragraph for each article they read. And they tell me, what did they think? What did they notice? What did they wonder? What connections did they make between what they read and what we've been learning about in class? And so I just ask them to be thoughtful and to look for those ahas, like, oh, I never thought of that before. And after the students have had about a half an hour to work on that, and they know they're prepared for this, then we go around the room and every student is asked to share one of their ahas of their choice. And when they share it, there will be no commentary. So we tell the class, we're here to listen. You share your aha, whether it's about Oreo cookies or something that's more uncomfortable. Tell us what you read, tell us what you thought, tell us what you noticed, tell us what connections you made, but we won't comment. There won't be any argument about it. We're not going to critique you. We just want to hear. We just want to listen. And that creates safety when we get to those uncomfortable topics. And then every student is free to share their views, their beliefs on that. I think that that's important with controversial topics to create that safety, because when you have students who are afraid, they disengage. And when students disengage, they're not learning and their brain goes into that protection mode. Mm-hmm. Sometimes there are topics that I'll just avoid at all costs. That there's just some of those today. The only reason those topics would enter our classroom is if a student asked about it. And I wouldn't shut the student down. If they have a question, they should ask. And then I will address their question. But often I find, especially these last few years, students avoid some of those topics because that makes them uncomfortable. and often they've already had negative experiences with that topic, and so they try to avoid it. And so that's part of creating intellectual safety in the classroom.
I may steal the aha statement.
Absolutely.
One of the things I want to kind of point out, and one issue we deal with today is this idea of, it's called presentism. And it's this concept that we take sort of our modern day morals ideas and then we put them on people a long time ago. All right, we're basically taking what we're looking at here and we're applying it to other time periods. And so, for example, the most popular sort of time period amongst a lot of students right now might be Greek gods and goddesses or something like that because of Rick Riordan books. But can you imagine applying our modern day values onto the Greek myths and gods? There's a reason why they call them myths. All right, in US mythology, there's this idea of George Washington chopping down a cherry tree, which he didn't. George Washington having wooden teeth, which he doesn't. If you did not know that, you can actually Google this, right now. You can see them in Mount Vernon. They're actually on display. So, but when we take our ideas of today and we apply them, it can create a really uncomfortable spot. So when I was in the high school, one area that pops up is the situation with Thomas Jefferson and his slave, Sally Hemings. All right, so there's a reading on it called The Meaning of Liberty, Thomas Jefferson and the Meaning of Liberty. And there's this idea of dirty politics. They were attacking Jefferson. He had promised his wife who died that he'd never remarry. And then it is discovered that he had many children with Sally Hemings. DNA testing had kind of proved that. And so there's this idea that people wanted to apply this sort of, value. The problem for many people was Sally Hemings was about 14 and Jefferson's 40. And so to many people out there, that is a eye-opening sort of shocking moment. All right, if we start applying things like this, if I roll in there one day and I start throwing this stuff out there, all of a sudden it's that uncomfortable and people start judging people based on presentism. I would be applying that to that idea of that classroom. All right. However, in like an AP class, you might want to examine what type of man Thomas Jefferson was. Was he the type of man to change society or point out what needed to be changed? Here's a slave owner who's against slavery. All right. When people examine the past and they use presentism, in their analysis, sometimes, do you look at somebody's greatest achievements or do you look at their personal failures? And I think sometimes in education and sometimes with dealing with things, they're not always sure. But so they take what they know, which is modern day times, and they want to apply it to something else. And I think that's called, that can cause issues sometimes with history. Now, in the middle school, I'm not going to bring up the situation with Sally Hemings, all right? But I can kind of apply Jefferson's contradictions at the same time, because here's a guy who ends up buying the Louisiana Purchase. Thomas Jefferson was the guy. Alexander Hamilton wanted a bank. You can't have a bank. It's not in the Constitution. He's what is called a strict constructionist. You can't have it. And Hamilton's like, why not? He's like, because it's not written in the Constitution. And Hamilton, not so nicely pointed out, nowhere in the Constitution does it say you can't have a bank. He said it was implied. So here you got, Jefferson all upset. Well, then flip it. Louisiana Purchase rolls around. Jefferson was offered the greatest, I'm going to date myself here, Kmart blue light special of all time. My first job was at Kmart, by the way. All right, of all time. Nowhere in the Constitution does it say Jefferson can buy this land. It is going to double the size of the United States, but nowhere in the Constitution does it say it. So Jefferson ultimately buys Louisiana Territory using this implied powers for a ridiculous low price of $15 million, 3 cents an acre, doubles the size of the United States, and strengthens our new republic. So there's this, this idea that, oh man, contradictions, and here's the thing, reality for both middle school students, AP students, Jefferson, throughout his lifetime basically had all these ideas, his thoughts, his ideas, but they're really hard to sometimes put into a realistic world because you're never going to make everybody happy. And I think that's kind of where we are at sometimes with education is that, everyone wants to try to make everybody happy. It's not always easy, especially with certain decision making. So question 4.
So our last question we posed ourselves is what process does our school go through to develop curriculum or purchase textbooks? So our middle school and high school has what's called the 612 Curriculum Council, and Todd's a member of the Curriculum Council. The council is made up of teachers from grades 6 through 12 from all different subject areas, and their job is to approve the curriculum that is taught at Ludington area schools from grades 6 through 12. And so when I was going through the process of getting my curriculum approved, I presented it to the Curriculum Council. And one of the things that the Curriculum Council is looking for is, are we teaching the state standards? Which state standards are we covering? They also want to know, are we teaching literacy and critical thinking skills? This year, we've also begun the process, in addition to presenting it to the council and then repeating that process every so many years. We've also begun publishing our curriculums on Canvas and then sharing our Canvas courses with the other teachers in our department. So everyone in the high school social studies department has access to the curriculum that I teach. They can view it, and the idea is to increase the transparency. And one of the benefits is then if a teacher who's never taught economics before has to all of a sudden cover an econ class, they can access my curriculum I've put together that's been approved by the Curriculum Council, and they have access to those materials. So we're helping each other out. Regarding textbooks, I've been teaching for 20 years and I've never been a part of a curriculum or textbook purchase process. A lot of my career has been shaped by the Great Recession, and school funding took a hit several years before the recession took place and took a hit several years after the recession ended. And because of that, districts had to make tough decisions and didn't always have money available to purchase new textbook sets. So I've never been a part of that process. I do have textbooks available in my classroom. Many of them are very old, but I do use selected chapters from those. And then I also supplement with different primary sources. So for civics, the biggest primary source is, of course, the Constitution and then the Declaration of Independence. I'll bring in Supreme Court decisions that relate to different standards we're teaching. I'll bring in different articles or articles that students have brought me. And so again, coming back to how do I decide what will be in my curriculum? What parts of the textbook are we going to use? Because the textbooks are huge and we have a trimester system with 12 weeks. You can't cover the whole textbook in 12 weeks. So I always go back again to those state standards. What am I expected to teach? And then if what is what I'm covering that standard, and if so, then I will teach it. And then I have to decide, and I think this is even more important than the content, is the skills that I want my students to learn and to demonstrate, because skills like reading and writing, skills like analysis, skills like civil conversation or civil discourse, I think those are the most important because those are transferable across all subject areas and into life. And so I try to figure out how I can incorporate those skills into the curriculum. And then finally, of course, making sure that whatever I'm teaching is engaging and relevant. If students don't see how it matters, it's not going to stick. So this shapes how I have students interact and how I design my curriculum.
Yeah, what Amber mentioned, like with Canvas and transparency, I mean, part of this is really important now in education. And I'll give you kind of an example. This is kind of the reality I think we are right now in education is we're trying to put our stuff into Canvas. We're trying to help everybody else out because, there is a really desperate need for educators right now all around there. I keep bringing this up that technically the entire middle school social studies department could leave in 2 years. That's 4 teachers could walk out the door and that would be a brand new, like, I can't even imagine trying to hire an entire department. So what we're trying to do is make sure that the next group out there has these resources. All right. I'm like, when she posed like the idea, like, what's a textbook? I'm like, what's a textbook? I'm only half kidding here because I was able to buy textbooks, I think in 2005. I had started like the AP program. I didn't even have them right away. So 2005, that's the last time I've been a part of a textbook thing. So nowadays, we try to create certain things. My wife will do things like interactive notebooks with with kids with the iPads and having those. They're creating their own sort of version of a textbook. I used to use binders that the kids would keep throughout the entire year and then usually burn at the end, but we won't go there. But you know, we are really kind of looking at everything from, you know, the state standards. I mean, whenever we look at anything else, and there's kind of this top down, I mean, that pyramid approach anyways, the federal government is technically on top, but they don't have a lot of say in things. Occasionally they'll put something out there like Constitution Day, September 17th is a federal requirement. All right. But most of the stuff is state and local. And so, you know, the states are the ones that kind of put together these things. When I first started teaching, the actual only required course in high school was government. All right. And then we have the Michigan merit requirement. So now things are more required and there's more things we have to do. And then sometimes local government will come in and explain what they want to have happen. So, you know, one of the things I do want to kind of point out there right now is, in addition to, you know, worries about curriculum, the one thing that is basically, I think we really have to kind of address nowadays is this sort of modern approach. And technology obviously plays a role, but back in the day, and I'm not talking necessarily back in the one-room schoolhouse days, but back in the day, is the teacher was usually the one that was kind of educated on certain things, and that they would bring that knowledge to the students. They would kind of bring it in there, but things have obviously changed now. A person with a smartphone can look up any information out there. Like, so pop quiz, anybody look up Washington's teeth? I will get somebody that will do it. Like I mentioned Washington, I'll get a kid that'll be like iPad. Oh my Lord, holy cow, it's Washington's teeth. There it is. So, you know, what is different is how we look at information, how we apply it. And not to mention is, and Mr. Nagel right here can probably shake his head on this, is the role of college, student loans, how they play a role now, AP tests, West Shore Community College, testing. How do kids go to these schools now? How they're trying to save money for college. So like a lot of stuff nowadays is starting to change because the cost of college and when they can take it, and things like the Promise Scholarship. These are things out there that are designed to try to help students save money. And so I want to kind of address like that role. So when I was an AP US history teacher, I was trying to get kids college credit, and I never cared at all. Like I didn't even know about the 1619 project or the 1776 project, because my role was to try to follow that curriculum as best I could to get kids to kind of pass that test. And so by passing that test, colleges would give them credits. And so I really looked at that as my job, trying to get kids to pass this test. So I have a former student of mine right now who's observing me. He wants to go into education. And so we just had this conversation the other day. He's going to Grand Valley. He passed the AP test with me. He is getting 6 credit hours at Grand Valley. It's about $2,000 for a 3 credit class at Grand Valley right now, and like $4,000 for 6 credits. So a $90 to $100 test would save them $2,000 to $4,000. And so for many of these kids, that's what their focus is in on that. And so for many of us, our role right now is to try to give them the best curriculum that's going to get them to pass these tests. And so trying to save these kids opportunities and money, I think that's playing a role now in how we are developing curriculums and what we're looking for. And we're trying to look at other things in other places as well, not just social studies. Like, are there other things out there that kids can do? And they're trying to figure out what to do that is going to be best for education from here on out.
So those are the 4 questions that we posed ourselves, and we hope that answered questions that you might have, and hopefully create some transparency about what we teach. And I think at this time, we'll open it up for any questions that we weren't able to address.
There's one. Yep. Go ahead. Oh, wait a second. We'll get the mic to you. So.
All right.
That kind of, you'll just take your mask off during the time when you're speaking to the microphone, because projection just gets stuck. Yep, if you can, just pull it down and talk.
I taught for 28 years at the O.J. DeYoung Junior High School, taught English, but I retired in 95. So that's been a couple of years ago. But when you were mentioning the state standards, I just wondered what your feeling was about the state standards. Do you feel that they're constricting? Do you feel that they're helpful? Do you feel that they're constructive? Do you feel they're realistic?
Mm-hmm. I can start.
Go ahead.
That's a great question. With civics and economics, which are two subject areas I specialize in at the high school, there is an unrealistic number for a teacher to cover. So for example, world history and US history, you're given 2 trimesters if you're in a trimester school, or 2 semesters to cover in a semester school, to cover about 56 standards. Economics and civics have about 60 standards for a 1 trimester or a 1 semester course. Part of that is because they're developed at the state level by people who, there's people that are in education that help write them, but then there's also a lot of politics that goes into the creation, and people have very high expectations for what they taught, but it's not always realistic to cover all of those. So it is unrealistic in that aspect. But at the other hand, it does give me an idea of where to aim. And I think that Ludington schools have been very supportive. They understand that they would rather that we do a few really well than try to cover everything, and just, depth versus breadth is the focus. So yeah, I mean, they could be, but I think our administration has just been so supportive about it that it hasn't been. And they do allow us for that ability to, like, how do I make this engaging? And so I think the goal is, if I'm going to do a lesson, I hope it covers multiple standards in one lesson to get the most bang for my buck, and hope that it's, very engaging and relevant.
One really good question. And I'll speak on 2 things. In some ways, when I was teaching AP, it was actually easier to follow that, because it pretty much, and I'm never going to say that I was going to teach to a test, but that was a test that I was trying to get kids, obviously, college credit for. So I'm trying to get them prepared. So I had to follow that curriculum, and it was actually pretty easy, because it kind of basically said, hey, these are all the things you have to cover in order to get these kids to pass the test. So I really appreciated that part of it. The other flip side, and I'll give you this is as honest as I can get on this. In 2019, I rolled into the middle school, and I had not taught anything about ancient history ever. So I rolled in there, and I'm like, first thing I had to do is I had to look at those standards. And so initially it was overwhelming. I'm like, holy cow, I have no idea about, like, I started looking at some of the stuff going, I don't think I've ever heard of that before. So I'm Googling and I'm looking through all the stuff. But what was unique is all of a sudden, and I made this joke, because, like, when I went to the middle school, everyone kept looking at me like my zipper was down. Like, what are you doing? Like, what you've been in the high school for so long. I'm like, they almost forgot, like, I knew how to teach. And so I looked at that and I'm like, oh no, I'm just trying to figure out, and I'm going through it. So the curriculum in 2019 really helped me kind of focus on learning it. And then I guarantee you, there's no way I covered every actual standard that I possibly could that first year, because it was kind of going through it. But I tried to look back at all the different areas out there. And I really looked at this. I think Amber talked about this in civics, is we kind of looked at the big picture, the power standards. What are the ones that are really going to have that bang for your buck? But in the process of doing that, as I looked at all these different ones, I'm like, holy cow, we're actually doing a really good job of covering a lot of these things, but in different ways. And then the light bulb opens up, and I really hope it does for the kids as well, that they kind of go, all right, I see this here, I see this here, I see these connections. Oh yeah, that's sort of what so-and-so's talking about here, and so-and-so's talking about here, and they start to recognize it and apply it. I think a lot of times with the state standards, sometimes I think it might be a little bit pie in the sky. Like, they're trying to put all these things out there. What I really would like to see them be able to do is basically say, what are these big ideas that we absolutely want our kids to be able to know, and kind of go from there. So.
Excellent. I do see a couple of questions from the internet. So Kathy, lost your connection? Okay, I can actually read it.
That's right. Oh, I've got a connection here. A little loud though.
You want to read it, Thomas? Go ahead.
Yeah. So are students taught to evaluate sources from the internet, vetting information for authenticity and accuracy?
Can somebody say that again?
Are students taught to evaluate sources from the internet? And that means, for this person, vetting information for authenticity and accuracy.
Yes. So that's covered in the English department and in the social studies department. We hit it really hard in the civics curriculum. But yeah, we talk about how do you look for accountability from the author. Do they own up to who they are? Do they post their name? Can you verify that the author of this article is a real person? We talk about verification. So do they provide other sources that I can go check to verify that what I'm reading is true? So how many sources do they provide of this information? We talk about independence. So the importance of this publication not being controlled by an outside interest. Let's see, accountability, verification. Oh, and transparency. Do they explain their process? Do they explain how they arrived at these conclusions, how they did their research? We also talk about trying to evaluate and look for warning signs of fake news. What are the things to look for? So that's something that we talk about in the civics curriculum, and I know in the English department they do as well.
I think she nailed that. I mean, I remember when I was there, like they were looking at how to like decipher certain websites, certain things out there, credible ones out there, you know. I always thought that there's an interesting story back in the day. You can look this one up too, about how like the deadly effects of dihydrogen monoxide, and people kind of go through it. And if anybody knows what I'm talking about, science teachers or whatever else out there, you know, like, you know, dihydrogen monoxide is it's found in everybody who, you know, like every cancer patient and all this stuff, and it goes on and lists it. And if you don't know what dihydrogen monoxide is, it's water, by the way, people. If you don't know what it is, like you can get fooled. And I think that's part of the thing is that, you know, understanding and looking at certain things out there, it can kind of open people's eyes. And I think that's what Amber is talking about. They do a really good job of breaking that down, especially, you know, like ELA. My wife's an ELA teacher, so I have to kind of give her that prop. They do a really good job of being able to set up, like using sources, citing sources, going through there, you know.
And the English department does a really good job of talking about looking for bias.
Actually,
Because
really.
we've met with the English department, like how do we break this without it being break it down without it being too repetitive? So we can build on each other and build on each other from grade to grade.
I have a question from that. And Todd, do you not do so much with the middle school students?
As far as what looking
This
at.
vetting on the internet, is it too difficult? Is it safe
Well,
for high school?
I mean, for the most part, like, you know, I'm not really, I can't really vet Hammurabi's code or the Rosetta Stone, you know, like it's kind of, you know, like, so when I'm dealing with the ancient, like I've just finished up ancient Egypt, you know, the Rosetta Stone, things like that. There's not as much out there for the ancient stuff. It really, I mean, some of that stuff is sold. That's the only thing that they have. They're just looking at it. When it comes to U.S. history, what I'm talking about there is, you know, document-based questions. I'm not going, like, I don't have to do a lot of stuff on modern. I mean, as modern as I get is like the end of Reconstruction. So like,
okay.
I'm kind of handcuffed in that regard because I'm not really dealing with much modern stuff. Although I will say this was really fascinating, like looking at stuff on like King Tut, you know, finding out like, how did he die? And that was really interesting because there's like 3 different theories. So those are things that were out there, but it was interesting because there's 3 different theories, and now you can pose it to the kids and let them decide. It was really neat to see, did he die? Was he murdered? Did he die of malaria? Was it a mistake? You know, and so letting kids kind of decide is really neat, but that's about it. Like, I don't get much anymore on that. So
There is another question online, but first, is there another question from the audience? We're going to play back and forth. Yes, this person over here. Thanks, Nathan.
Is it on? Oh, yes. Okay, my name is Judith Dilla. I was a teacher long ago, and I spent all my time in the inner cities of schools. So I taught in Detroit, in the inner city. I taught in New York City, the inner city, and I taught in Denver, in the inner city. And I can tell you that it was a very, very different experience from what you are describing. I would be delighted to be in your classrooms. I would be delighted for kids to experience that. But there are children that come from areas, I'm sure around here, that experience poverty, that experience homelessness, that experience conditions that you do not have to address in your classes, but they come into your classes. And so I worry about those children. They're not all going to college. They're not all going to be brilliant. But what do you do to prepare those kids in our world today? the parents, when you describe Canvas, for example, I'm thinking there are parents that work really hard and they don't have time to track their kids, or even have the facility to do it at home. I think we're so fortunate here that all the kids are given iPads. It's amazing. And the new facility is amazing, but there is still disparity. And I would like to know what you do about that, or if you have any solution, not solution, but any suggestions.
Well, it's certainly an area that's always a concern for a teacher. We do have, as you mentioned, the one-to-one devices, the iPads, and we also have hotspots available for students who don't have internet available at home. But you mentioned perhaps a parent that doesn't have that access. And that's something that we struggle with. We do our best to make it available. So as a teacher, I view it as my job to make it as available as possible. But I think that's the area where society can step in to help. How do we help then parents to then access what we've made available? And I think that the pandemic has really brought a lot of that to light, the lack of internet. And when we were doing virtual learning, there were the students who could access it and the students who couldn't. And so that is an ongoing problem. And I don't know that we really have the answer for that yet.
There is no doubt that what you're describing is absolutely going on, and it's absolutely difficult. I'll use this as a sort of an analogy. I mean, I don't know off the top of my head if I have any solutions, but it's one that we can ponder. It's kind of like I always call it like the parent-teacher conference scenario in this regard. Anybody who's ever sat through a parent-teacher conference as a teacher will understand this. I probably get the kids, 90% of the parents I get are the ones that the kids are getting A's. Mm-hmm. It just is. Like, parent-teacher conferences isn't what I think anymore, what people think it is. Ideally, I should be seeing the kids that are struggling and the parents that are there, and that's not what usually happens. The kids that I do see are the ones whose parents are there, and it's that constant thing. So like, I never worried about a parent-teacher conference after like my first one, because it was kind of like one of those moments, like I knew I was going to see the ones. I get maybe one or two of the ones I absolutely needed to see. And that's a hard part. Like, that's almost the same sort of situation we're looking at right now, is like what you're posing is one of those things where trying to rack your brain, like we're trying to rack our brain right now on how to fix parent-teacher conferences in the age of the pandemic. I haven't, like, how do you get a hold? And we're trying to work on some things. And so one of the things that we're actually trying to do now is we are contacting and trying to get a hold of, in any way, shape, or form that we can, parents. And it's this week. So parent-teacher conference this week. So it's on my head. It's like, we're trying to get a hold of those ones. We're trying to focus in on the ones that probably need our help or our support. The hard part is even then, with everything else that's going on, it's hard to get a hold of them, or it's hard to, maybe put in their mind what they can do, and to try to help them out. So it's a really good question to think about. I just don't know if I have a solution or an answer off the top of my head, but it is something that I think we are trying to look at. And the iPads do help, but it's not always, that's not a magic elixir, the iPad. So, and
there was another part of your question, not all of our students are college bound. And that's something that I think all schools are really trying to address. It's about your post high school plans. Mm-hmm. And how do we prepare our students for whatever their plan is after high school? And we really do try to emphasize that there's vocational paths, or there's entering the workforce. And so Todd talked about advanced placement and helping them with the AP course for college, but that's an optional class. They don't have to take that one. So in the required courses, we think about what are the skills that every human needs for living in a democracy. And a lot of that is, how do I discern the information out there and decide if it's factual? How do I interact with my society? So a lot of it is literacy skills and critical thinking skills. More than the content, I think those skills are the most important, because those are the things that the student, no matter if they're going to college or they're going to a trade school or they're entering work right away, those will still be valuable.
Yeah,
I will take, sorry, did you want to?
I was just going to throw in there, like,
online, and then we'll come back here to a live person here. Oh, you didn't
Oh,
want to add?
I
You
was
can
just going to
add. Go
address like
ahead.
the vocational stuff like this. It's funny, like, I spent so much of my life dealing with like history and this, but like in my, I look back on it, like the things that I love to do outside are like the building trades and everything else. And, like welding and, like I can do a lot of those things. So like those skills are such in need right now. Like you wouldn't believe, like if, kids are looking for something like that there are absolutely some opportunities out there, and they are such in need right now. The pandemic, I think, is exposing that the building trades and things like that, or other skills that people might have, find a skill that you guys can utilize, and then, kind of go from there. I mean, I think that's a little bit of where we're at. So.
Mhm. Okay. Online is the legislators in some states are considering guidelines that protect students from feeling uncomfortable. Is this realistic? So,
No.
and I know that you actually spent quite a bit of time, I think, talking about this, your continuum, but maybe you just want to, why is it unrealistic?
Well, if it's not uncomfortable, it's boring. But like I said, you don't want it to be so uncomfortable it triggers that fight or flight response. But yeah, life's about discomfort, and the most interesting topics generally are a tad uncomfortable. I don't see that being realistic. No.
I don't even know how you'd even go about trying to define what an uncomfortable feeling would be. Like, how would you even be able to describe like what one person might feel is uncomfortable? Like, I can't even fathom, the mindset of trying to, pose that as a setup. So.
Okay, Nathan, do you want to bring the mic to here? That'd be great.
Is it on? Yeah. First of all, I want to thank you both. And as a former colleague, I know how hard you guys work. And again, this is essentially going to be a late night. Even 9 o'clock can be a late night for a teacher. So thank you both for being here. I've got a couple of things. First of all, Todd, I'm glad your students haven't done research and come to you about aliens building. And critical thinking skills, of course, are universal. They're universal, any trade, any profession.
Mhm.
So I was thinking that in my head as you were formulating your answer as well. And Amber, this is really more of a curiosity question. The initial breaking out into groups that you talked about with the test or the cases, and you use Skokie as an example. So I understand that when you have the kids break out into those groups, they don't know ahead of time how those cases were determined, correct?
Correct.
How often do you find that the students align with what the courts decided?
It's hard. It's really hard I would say 50-50. That'd be my gut, but I'm probably off a little bit. You'll notice that when they first start talking, because I'll always listen in, and there's probably 7 different groups talking at the same time. So I'm trying to monitor 7 groups, but like that's not right. Right. That's not right. But then they start looking at, well, here's the purpose of the First Amendment. And if you limit that, then are we limiting the First Amendment? Are we define the purpose of the Constitution? And you have to assign roles when they're in those groups. So I always have in civics class, I have the chief executive whose job is to keep the group on task and watch the time and make sure everyone's doing their job. And then I have a secretary who's recording the discussion. And then I have provocateurs, and provocateurs are the ones who their job is to probe for specificity or to ask new questions or to say, did we think deep enough before they move on? So they have their roles and they're given these cards with sentence starters to help them. And so when they use those eventually, because those provocateurs have some sentence starters, they start asking questions, and then they're like, well, I don't know. Just because it doesn't feel right doesn't mean it's not constitutionally protected. And so you do get, I would say about 50-50. People will say, I know, I don't like it. It's not popular, but does that mean it shouldn't be protected? And so then that's why the conversations are so interesting. If they all had the same opinion, it would be boring.
That's when critical thinking really is going on. When you can say, I don't like it, but The but becomes very important then as well. This is constitutionally sacred.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, somebody says, very much enjoyed your presentation. Thank you. I'm very reassured by what you have shared. I would have loved to be a student in either of your classes. So one of our goals was to have people understand what you really do.
Thank you.
Anybody else here have a question? Yes.
Hi. You make me want to go back to high school, which I swore off a long time ago. Anyway, do you know where Michigan stands nationally in the rankings? And I know there are lots of different factors, but where do we stand?
It would depend which ranking.
College, graduation, high school, completions. Let's go with high school completion. Each student, do you know where we stand?
No. No, do you?
You know, it's weird because I'm not 100% sure, but if I think you're at, is it somewhere in like the late 30s, early like 40s out of there? Is that what you're looking at as far as like state levels go? I think I don't know off the top of my head where that is, so I probably shouldn't speak on it. But I think I've heard different things about where we rank on like graduation rates. Is that what you're talking about?
Okay, so is first and the late 30s to the 40s means we're near the bottom. Okay, so what does that say about the state guidelines, what they want taught? We're not, if teachers are following that, where's the dichotomy? What's going on here?
I think, well, I mean, this is the situation sometimes I think we deal with is the curriculums might be okay and stuff like that, but it's actually who writes the test, how tests are written, how certain things are going. And like, it's weird because when I write a test for my kids, I'm the one that taught it. I'm the one that's looking at it. I think Mike Nagel can agree to like this. If you're writing a test that you go through and do, you kind of know what you've taught and kind of what you went around with. But like in an AP or like even a state standard, like you don't know what they're going to get until the day they arrive. And so it's like sometimes you cram a whole bunch of stuff in, but you don't know what they're going to be asked of. So it's really hard sometimes to get an accurate idea of what's being taught. Because I think we both probably do a pretty decent job of going through it, but we have no clue going into that day what's going to happen. And so, I think that's the hard part about knowing what we're doing. But I think what a more accurate idea that we've gotten over the years is how are our kids doing when they get to college, or how are they doing when they go out into the workforce? Are they able to be, key members of society? Are they able to go out there when they leave? And I think that's sometimes a bigger role that we play nowadays, more so than a test score.
Yes, Nathan.
So I'll actually ask a question here. How do extracurriculars factor into the classroom? What is the relationship or purpose of doing that to you guys, or sports as well?
I think all extracurriculars, whether it's athletics, whether it's the arts, whether it's Quiz Bowl or robotics or BPA, or even the new gaming club, all of those are critical. I think there's so many soft skills that can't be taught in the classroom, but that occur in extracurricular activities. And that's the place where students gain that identity that I'm an Oriole. I belong to Ludington area schools, and they form those friendships. So both of us coach Quiz Bowl, and Quiz Bowl it's trivia. So you're in a team, and we have a pretty large Quiz Bowl team, abnormally large. But so you can compete 4 at a time against a different school, and a moderator will read questions, and the round is timed, and you buzz in, and if you answer correctly, you get points. And I've had people ask me, well, why does that even matter? Because I mean, robotics, you can see why that matters. And I said, yeah, the trivia doesn't matter, but playing basketball isn't about what I do. Basketball isn't my future either. And Quiz Bowl isn't my future. It's about how do I handle myself under pressure? How do I work well with others? How do I prepare and not let my team down and learn how to dedicate myself to something and to work hard? How do I help build up my team? Those are the lessons that extracurriculars, whether it's Quiz Bowl or basketball or band, those are the lessons that they teach. I find that when students are engaged in an extracurricular and they feel that sense of belonging, they enjoy their high school experience more, but I think they also get more out of their curriculum. And with Quiz Bowl, there's so many opportunities. We're like, oh my gosh, we just learned that in Mrs. Tebow's class, or oh my gosh, we just learned that in Mr. Klug's class, and I've got to tell him. And that's always really fun.
So Nathan has been a member of our Quiz Bowl team when he asked the question, and I've coached him for the last couple of years in Quiz Bowl. And everybody out there, like, I think what Miss Nathan is getting at is if you join something, you become part of that. And in our case, you become part of like this bow tie nation that walks the hallways. And there is something unique about watching 40 kids wearing orange bow ties in a hallway that kind of illustrates that they're part of something. And it has been, my personal like pleasure to be a part of that for the last like 7-8 years now. But I think what she's also talking, kids do better when they're engaged in something in addition to school. Like their GPA or their grades go up, their involvement goes up. Their community involvement is always there. Like they're helping everybody else out. They're trying to make sure that, if their teammates have something, but it's also this idea of this lifelong sort of friendships that kind of evolve out of it. They can go to different colleges, they can go different places, but they're bonded by these experiences. And it's for all sports. Like I've coached other sports out there, but any of these extracurriculars, my son is involved in the band and they're doing like a big fundraiser right now for the band, for band uniforms. They're trying to get involved and the community is getting involved. And I think when people see that, they see that connections, that they're all part of this. And it just, it makes you happy that you're involved in a community that wants to be involved. And, we're kind of unique that this will be the only place in the history of mankind that's ever done like a police escort to nationals for a Quiz Bowl team. All right. That's a pretty impressive thing. So.
And shameless promotion, if you guys watch PBS at all, we've been invited to participate in the CMU Quiz Central Tournament, and all of the episodes were recorded this fall, and they just started airing in January. So last week, Ludington was on PBS. So if you were to go to CMU Quiz Central and click watch now, Ludington's the most recent episode. You could watch your local students compete and do a really awesome job. So check it out.
Also, little pub, they won it all last year.
They what?
Right now,
sorry.
we've had as many as 45. And we have 2 JV teams and a varsity team. This year, because of COVID, we're rebuilding, so we're at 35 right now.
Yeah. By the way, last year they won it all. So just to throw that out there.
There are 2 questions in closing because we were actually out at our last time. Was there another question, Nathan? Were you going? Mike had one? Go ahead. Well, because it's Mike, he had brought these people to us.
This isn't
And
a
you're going
question. Just because the issue came up of graduation rates and that. And according to US News and World Report,
using the old phone.
I just did a real quick Google search. The average is 88% is the graduation rate for high schools. And it's between 75 and 94, but the average is 88. And at another site, I saw that Michigan was at 84.2 or something like that. So that's about where we are. But if I could just make a quick comment and just say, aren't these great teachers? Oh man, we are so lucky at Ludington area schools. This has just been great. So anyway.
Yep. So yes, I want to ask though, I tried to ask online and I didn't get any answers. How many here are somewhere had careers in education, teaching, administration, etc.? Whatever. Well, thank you. So it's why we're here. There is the last question. I saved it till last online, which the question is, should we have a snow day tomorrow?
Well, even if it's a snow day, we're still learning.
Yeah.
We're going to be online learning.
Snow days,
I told the students I'll
Yeah.
have my big mug of coffee and I might still be in my pajamas, but we'll still be learning.
Still be learning. Well, again, Mike, you said it already. These are wonderful teachers. And as somebody said online, they are so reassured by hearing directly from teachers, which was the whole reason for putting teachers in front of us, is to say, who really are our teachers? And do we have to worry about them? No, we're very proud of what you do. So thank you, and thank you for coming tonight. And one other message, we skip next week, and we begin in February with race and racism. Mike Nagel will be back for two, actually, Mondays. The first one is with Rick Plummer. Many of you know him, actor, director, playwright. He will be on Zoom, but he will be in the role of John C. Calhoun as he is being taken down. It's a 10-minute play written by a woman in New York and performed during COVID in Miami. But as John C. Calhoun is being taken down from a Confederate statue, we'll hear from words during his life that he said. And then, and Mike will play facilitator between audience and the actor for next week, or for the first Monday in February. And then Mike will be back the second Monday in February, so February 7 and February 14, Valentine's Day, for talking with us then about how do we think critically about taking Confederate statues down or leaving them up. Be a very interesting kind of conversation as we go forward. And just for another plug is the third Monday in February on race and racism will be a woman from the South who has a book about white women and their role in the white power movement. So lots in store as we go ahead. And thank you so much for coming out live and on Zoom. Very snowy night. There are treats in the back. Take them home with you if you like, or sign up for a book. And very good night to you all. Thank you.